Monotype.
Welcome to Creative Characters from Monotype, the show where we meet the people working at the intersection of type and everyday life. I'm your host, Bill Connolly, and I'm thrilled to be back on the podcast because it's been a while. And today I'm extra excited because I'm chatting with John Trauscht, who is a senior graphic designer at Pixar Animation Studios. He modifies graphic design in beloved Pixar films, bringing them to international audiences all over the world. That sometimes involves hand designing text and other visual elements in many different languages. Here's how John approaches his design work at Pixar.
I call it creative surfing. Be ready for any wave that comes your way because you never know what it's going to be. And certainly you can plan, and planning is a good thing. But when you have creative minds, an idea can come out of left field and disrupt those plans very quickly. And that happens around here a lot.
So I interviewed John from LA. I was in town for Canva Create. But our producer, Mia, was able to go on site to Pixar's campus in the Bay Area to record John in person. And extra special treat, Mia is here with me today to preview this episode. Hi, Mia.
Hey, Bill. How's it going?
It's going quite well. I'm really excited to see you and happy that you could join me today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
So you got to go and spend time with John at the Pixar Studios. I'm super curious, what was that experience like?
Honestly, it was kind of surreal. I had a decent amount of anticipation for it. You know, everyone loves Pixar films, and John was right there to meet me in the Steve Jobs building. It's a space where Steve Jobs had a hand in designing, and there are lots of glass walls and the light comes in. We originally were thinking maybe we could record there, but it's such a big space. So we went upstairs to a conference room overlooking the atrium. And that's where we did the interview and met you, Bill.
So after we did the interview, by the way, what happened? I know you shared the tour didn't end at that point.
Yeah, so John toured me around the Steve Jobs building a bit.
So this is the Toy Story 5 gallery. Here's Lily Pad's concept design. This is a new character, Blaze, and Jimmy Dean is her pet pig.
Nice. It's kind of like a small museum for Pixar. So there's concept art on the wall. Toy Story 5 is one of the films that John is currently working on. And he was showing me storyboards and clay models from Toy Story 5 and hoppers as well.
Amazing. And I heard you got to take a photo with some celebrities.
Yeah, so toward the end of the tour, John stopped me and said that I needed to take a photo with Woody, Jesse, and Bullseye. So that photo may appear in our social promotion.
Oh, that photo will appear in our social promotions. Kind of to bring it full circle, you know, my nickname throughout my childhood all the way through high school was Woody because I do resemble him and my body is similarly shaped in terms of just being like a rag doll, you know, long, lanky limbs like Woody. So, you know, I've always identified with that character in particular, and I'm jealous that you got to meet him in person.
Well, I'm so happy you went there, Bill, because I actually was meaning to ask you if you were a Pixar character, which one would you be? So you answered my question before I asked it.
Yeah, it would be Woody. Maybe not one I would choose. It's just he's my kindred spirit. Yeah. To your point, everybody, at least of a certain age, you know, grew up with the stories from Pixar being core to their, you know, their experience. So yeah, must have just been such a fun day at work.
It definitely was. It'll be an experience I remember for sure. Well, Bill, thank you so much for hosting. It's been far too long since you've been on the show. We've missed you. Let's turn it over to you and John.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Creative Characters. I'm today's host, Bill Connolly. It's been a while since I've been here on the podcast, and I'm super excited to be back today with a guest that I know I am personally very excited to speak with, John Trauscht, who is a senior graphic designer at Pixar Animation Studios. That's right, the company that brings some of the most memorable storytelling into our homes, honestly, for a generation. We're going to get into a lot of the details of that. But first, I just want to say welcome to the podcast, John. Thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
And what's really interesting about today's podcast, I have to say, is the dynamic nature of our production, because we really do these things a lot. They're not, in person in a studio typically. We have a wonderful production team, and today we are flexing the full muscle of them. So, John, you are up in the Bay Area with one of our producers, Mia, in the Pixar offices. Is that correct?
Yes, we are. We are overlooking the atrium in the Steve Jobs building right now.
Oh, amazing. And I'm very jealous that I'm not there, but I'm in a cool place too. I'm down in Santa Monica, California, and I have to give a quick shout out to the Beach House Co-work here on Main Street in Santa Monica. They're letting me use one of the spaces in their studio to record. So, and Chris, our other producer, is working with me on that. So, John, you're at Pixar, but let's back up. And this is creative characters, and you don't become a character in the creative world without somewhat of an origin story, like a great Pixar character having an interesting origin story. So let's start with you. When you were growing up, what were some of those maybe formative experiences that kind of led you into a career in design?
As a kid, I was gifted in art and music and not much else. And I grew up in a very conservative family, and my folks, bless their heart, they didn't know what to do with me. They didn't understand the world of commercial art and didn't know how to advise me. I was a loved kid. They just didn't know how to direct me. And so when I got into college, I majored in journalism, and I took a graphic design class just for fun. And my professor told me that I should consider changing my major. And I kind of laughed. I'm like, oh, yeah, right. And so I graduated and I got my first job at a PR agency. And I was writing press releases for a real estate company. And I was absolutely miserable. I was writing these press releases on a typewriter. And one day we got these word processing machines. And this was the first significant thing that happened. I was able to change the size and the style of the font. And this was a revelation to me. I'm like, what the heck? This was in the early 90s. The desktop revolution was in its early period. And it fascinated me. And the first thing that I did is I made a giant letter H, as big as I could fit on the page. And I printed it out on the laser printer down the hall. I had to hurry up before anybody saw me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I made a giant letter H on the laser printer. It was so exciting to me. This is the best thing that happened to me at this job so far. And so that was significant thing number one. Significant thing number two was we were working on a brochure for a client. And we had to go to the design agency across the street. And when we walked through the door, it was as if the clouds parted and beams of light shined down. And I thought, oh my gosh, what are these people doing? This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And I knew right away my teacher in college was right. I should have changed my major. But I knew right then that I had kind of been a fool. But I wasn't done being a fool. I had quit my job, and instead of going to school, I started a band in Chicago, of all places. I don't know what I was thinking. I thought I was going to be a rock star or something in a city basically known for its bar circuit. That lasted about a year. And I realized while I was doing all the promotional work for the band, flyers and logos and all the stuff that you do to promote your band, this is graphic design. And I think I'm kind of good at it. Like, my teacher was saying, and I could probably use all this stuff to get into school, into art school, which is what I did. So I went back to school. I was like super motivated at this time. And I got through in about a year and a half. I got my art degree. And what do I do now? I went back to what I knew. I went back to real estate, but as a graphic designer this time. And I was making pretty charts and presentations and that sort of thing until I got an opportunity to work at a proper design agency. And we were doing food and beverage packaging and point of purchase items, floor displays and campaigns. And then I got an opportunity to work at a startup animation company in Chicago called Big Idea Productions. I was the 40th employee there, and that's how I kind of got into entertainment. And worked there in Chicago for about 5 years, was eventually moved to Nashville, worked in Nashville with them for another 5 years. And then in 2009, I got laid off from there and started up a design agency with a few other people who were laid off from there. For about 5 years, we tried to make a go of it. Had some mixed results, but was able to get enough clients together. I kept most of my clients from there, and I worked from home for a period of time after that. And that was not a good time for me. The isolation from working from home after all that time working with other creatives around me was hard mentally on me. And I didn't realize the spiral that I was going down mentally. It was taking a toll on me, including my physical health. They were the dark days, and I realized I needed to make some changes. Before the Pixar opportunity came along, I kind of made this decision that I was going to walk away from freelance. I was going to walk away from client work. I was just going to do things for myself. So while I was at Big Idea, the other animation studio, I developed some fonts for them for the style guide, and I really enjoyed doing that. And I thought, okay, well, this is something that I can do for myself that I really enjoy doing. And if people buy them from me, wonderful. And, maybe I can make some income that way. And maybe I can do some merch, my own little studio, and sell some t-shirts and hats. And, and that can be my income going forward. I didn't know if it would be enough. Since I was in Nashville, I thought, maybe I could even start over and get an internship at Hat Show Print or something like that and do some prints and things of that nature. I kind of wanted to just start over. And that's when I got a text from my friend who worked at Pixar. And he said, "Hey, John, are you available for some freelance?" And I kind of blinked, took a breath, and I'm like, heck yeah, I am. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So I never got started on that whole font project. But I did have kind of a restart in my career that I wasn't planning on. And it's been great. The first thing that I got to do was work on a film called Onward. And I started as a contractor from Nashville, which was unusual for Pixar at the time. They did not really like using contractors at the time. They liked people on site. Turned out it was kind of a precursor for the pandemic. They kind of used me as a model for what they would end up doing for people working from home. During the pandemic, there was a hiring freeze, so they couldn't hire me. So we kind of had to wait until a certain period of time went by or until the hiring freeze was lifted. And as soon as that passed, I got a job offer and I moved out to California, and here I am. My first day on the job, no, my second day on the job, actually, I was on site here on campus, and my now boss threw me to the wolves. She had a film crew follow me around, and I am B-roll on episode 6 of Inside Pixar. And I thought to myself, is this what it's like working here?
I appreciate you walking through that whole history. There's a lot to unpack there, but it's clear. There's a couple of points I sort of noted and wrote down when you were speaking. One is, early on getting into that creative field, where your parents weren't really sure what to do with you. But I think that's okay. The more you look at people in creative fields, you just need adults that kind of give you permission to explore it. So between that, even if they don't really know themselves where you should go, and then your professor who or who was like, you should be doing this and changing your career, you had some of that encouragement, even if it was not directed. I love Chicago. I love the idea of Chicago in the 90s too. And as a quick aside, my father-in-law owned a design agency in Printers Row in Chicago at that time called Cagney McDowell.
Nice.
And so I learned a lot about the whole evolution of typography through his eyes too, and my mother-in-law's eyes, who's also a graphic designer, talking about all of the things you mentioned there about the ability to dynamically change typography in a web environment for the first time, and not just go to a printer who had the lead set type and did things that way. So we go through, in our industry, we go through all of these different iterations of change as well. And we're in another one now with all of the technology evolving. But it's easy to forget that type, as well as the rest of design, has gone through these changes before, these paradigm shifts before. And people like yourself have had to learn how to navigate them.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting one. And then the other piece that you talk about being a musician and starting a band, one thing about me is on the side that I'm a comedian, and I've done comedy for 15 years. And I have been consistently astounded, and maybe for those who work in the creative field, this won't be a surprise to them, is how transferable those skill sets are. That when you want to start a band, or you want to do comedy, or you want to become a writer or something, and then you find yourself in these environments, you're surrounded by other people that want to do that stuff, or have done that stuff, or are exploring all kind of facets of their creative identity too.
Right. One of the things I love about Pixar is there are so many people here with so many different gifts, not just that they use to do their jobs, but that they use on the side for all of their side interests that they could probably do for a living as well. They're so good at so many different things. Speaking of music, we had an event last year called Pixar Palooza, with bands comprised mostly of Pixar employees. We were limited to 20-minute sets, but people would be in multiple different bands. And I think I was in 4 different bands.
Wow.
It was a blast. It did more for company morale than anything I've ever experienced before. It was so much fun.
I feel that deeply. I remember being in a job interview many years ago, not at Monotype, thankfully. I think Monotype understands the value of this bit, but I put on my resume that I've done improvisation. I've studied improv in all these different places and stuff. And the person interviewing me said, well, if you ever got a break in improv, you got on Saturday Night Live or something, how could we trust that you'll still work here? And I was like, I wouldn't work here. I'd be out of here the next day. But don't you understand that me having some sort of creative skill is a net positive to the business? Like many of your employees probably do, but clearly don't feel comfortable using them in their work. And so that's always stuck with me. A company that understands the full kind of creative identity of their employees and lets them express that is better off for it. And,
yes.
And we'll get to the Pixar. I'm very curious about the culture at Pixar too, which we'll get to shortly. But it's clear that that's part of the ethos there.
100%.
The other thing I wanted to ask you, John, about your history is being early on the work from home, I guess, pre-pandemic side. All of us who are of a certain age, not of a super certain age, but I know that the youngest generation of people coming to the workforce came post-pandemic now. It's 6 years since the pandemic struck, and they're entering a workforce that is entirely different than anyone else did, where you weren't working from home when you started your first job. You weren't having, you might get a summer Friday or something, but all of us were coming to the office 5 days a week, more or less.
Right.
And so being early on that train where you became the model for how that worked, I believe, this is where I'll editorialize a little bit, but I believe that we're in a bit of a modern renaissance right now where people are coming out of that sphere. And you mentioned the feeling of being isolated and not liking that. I think all of us had that collective experience during the pandemic, but similar to the Renaissance, we're now coming back into cities, we're coming back into hybrid or in-person environments and seeking that. But to the other point, also now feeling like we're trying to redefine what work means. And bring those full parts of our creative selves into everything that we do, whether that means that we have portfolio careers and we're doing a bunch of different stuff and not just working for one employer, or whether it means that we are working, with an employer like both of us are, but really kind of fully bringing ourselves into that experience in ways that maybe we weren't comfortable doing before. So I'm curious your thoughts, having gone through that and been early on that track. How has your relationship to work evolved, or the way that you've thought about that kind of full creative identity evolved over time?
I've talked to a lot of different people, including my family, my kids. I can't turn this off. I can't turn off who I am. And every part of me that is creative, whether it's visual or music or all of it wrapped together in a package, I can't turn it off. And I need to bring the whole thing to work with me. And when I come here, I can do that. I know how lucky I am being able to help tell these stories. And even though I just have one specific role here, I'm not in the story department, but what I do contributes to the storytelling. And I haven't really talked specifically about my role yet. I'm in the international department. So what we do is we take the domestic version of the film and we modify it for international audiences. And that can be between 12 and 40 different territories around the world. For Onward, we did 40, but for most other films, it's between 11 and 12 different languages. And that can depend on the content of the film. It can depend on budgets. When I come to work, I know I have a role to play, but I know that I can develop myself as an artist in full. It's not just that I have my role. We have a thing here called Pixar University that allows us to take classes and things that are not necessarily a part of what our role is. And we also have something called the lab, which allows us to pursue things that might be outside of our role. If we have an idea that we want to explore, and if we're in between assignments. But as far as my role goes, when we approach each film as part of the international team, the first thing that we do is we screen the film. We do what's called spotting, and we look for story points that are visual. And often these things are going to be either words or some sort of graphic, and things that I'm going to have to change. In Toy Story 5, we have a couple of characters that are digital in nature, new characters. There's Lily Pad and Mr. Smarty Pants. Lily Pad is the antagonist, and Mr. Smarty Pants is a new character voiced by Conan O'Brien. And they both have these displays, and they use these displays to help communicate. And so Mr. Smarty Pants, he might read along with his display, if he's got an incoming message. So how does that work if it's in another language now that I have not heard the translation for yet? And it's in a language that I don't speak or understand, but I have to put that in After Effects, and I have to imagine what that cadence might be visually as it's displayed. So that's part of my challenge, but it's something that's really interesting and engaging to me. And I don't know how to explain how it all comes together. It's always changing. You always have to be ready for anything because every film is different, and every film brings its own set of challenges. There's handwritten things. The handwriting can be different styles, and you have to be ready for different styles of things. And half the time, they're not even real fonts. Half the time, it's all hand tooled
calligraphy or
typography. Yeah, I've got to modify things by hand, which is great for me. I love it.
let's get into the Pixar of it all, because I just am fascinated, and I think there's been a lot of study around Pixar. Famously, I think the first film took many, many, many years to do, and still there's a lot of time and energy that's invested in producing these stories that are perennial Oscar winners and move people emotionally. I wrote a book about creativity in 2019, and some of the research that I came across was the study of Pixar as a culture and some of the creative abrasion that goes into even the things you were just speaking about. There's so many things moving at once, and it's not linear how these things change, right? So,
No, it's not.
yeah. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, what makes that culture so special at Pixar, from the people, from the processes, from all of it? What have you taken, away from that in your work there?
Well, I have a personal philosophy. This is not a Pixar thing, but my personal philosophy is, I call it creative surfing. Be ready for any wave that comes your way, because you never know what it's going to be. And you just have to be flexible. You think there is an order to things, but with creative minds, certainly you can plan, and planning is a good thing. But when you have creative minds, often those plans are a very loose thing. And an idea can come out of left field and disrupt those plans very quickly. And that happens around here a lot. Shots can be removed, new shots can come in, and I can spend time doing something that gets tossed out. From the international perspective, I have to wait as long as I possibly can to get started on things to minimize that. On the domestic end, they have to deal with this all the time. They work on stuff that gets tossed out all the time, the graphic designers on that end. And I try to work as closely as I possibly can with them so that I'm not surprised when things change. But sometimes we communicate with each other better than other times. They're really good over there with giving me what I need. But, we're all very busy, and, sometimes things slip through. And so I have to be ready for anything. Creative people are just, we're that way. We have to be ready for anything.
Well, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier around being a creative person, being a creator, being a musician, because I always resonate well with people that I know have gigged, because they have dealt with it all. I heard a talk from the founder of Patreon, who did that, just like going up and down the California coast playing. And sometimes you'll show up and it's a packed house. Sometimes you show up and they're cleaning up and there's no one there, and you still have to do the thing. Yeah. And, you find yourself in these bizarre scenarios, but you learn how to adapt because of that. And so in the environment you're describing, to just be like, well, I worked on this thing and we're throwing it out. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I've been there before. Okay, let's try something new. So you've got to be surrounded with people that are equipped to do things that way.
Yes. One of my favorite things when I was a kid was when I when I was in Cub Scouts, and they would give us like a paper bag full of stuff, and they said, "Okay, make something with this." Like you couldn't like go to the store and get anything else. You just had to do with what you had in the bag. I loved that kind of thing. Like you had these built-in restrictions, but you could do anything with what you had there. And you never knew what was in the bag. And it's like, okay, all right, this is what I have to work with. What can I do with this? And a lot of times that's what the creative process is like, okay, this is what I have. What can I do with this? And this is a lot of what happens in my job. I have this and I have this. What can I do with this? Mm-hmm. And to your point with what you were saying about music is adaptation and collaboration. Filmmaking is a very collaborative process. It's always going to be different. You need to be ready for anything. Also, you have to let go of your ego. Oh my gosh. An ego will kill you. You know, that's something that I learned maybe the hard way a long time ago. But yeah, kill that sucker.
I don't think there's any easy way to learn it. It's a hard lesson, a hard-earned lesson, but that's good, right? I think, I have to ask about AI, and I don't want to do it in the way of, what's AI going to do to the industry and all that stuff. That's a well-tread conversation. I more care about it, and I write a bit about this too, still trying to navigate myself about what it means for storytelling. And I'm from Boston, and I always use the corollary of Good Will Hunting, which is when I travel around, people always associate Boston with Good Will Hunting. But there's that famous scene where Robin Williams is with Matt Damon on the park bench, and he's saying, I could ask you about war, and you'd recite every text on war and the experience of it. And I could ask you about love, and you'd read me a sonnet, and you'd talk about every Shakespearean tragedy, but you've never known what that actually feels like. And that's how I feel about AI is, it can do all of those things, but a storytelling machine like Pixar that consistently gets it right with the emotional experience of being human. And you could go down the entire roster of any of the franchises that, your company has produced over the last 30 or 40, whatever, however long you've been in existence, years. How do you think about maintaining that uniquely, innately human quality while leveraging some of the tooling and, the very powerful production opportunity that comes with AI?
Well, I can't speak for the company.
Sure.
And how it's utilizing AI, but I will only speak for myself. I don't know how AI can express the human experience. It can't. It can only imitate the human experience. It can only pretend. Only people can express what it's like to be human, and whether it's in words or visually, AI can only imitate that. And it will always be an imitation, no matter how advanced it gets. You can use a hammer as a tool, but a hammer isn't human. I don't know in terms of storytelling if we will ever be able to get that right with AI. It's my hope that human element is always something that is maintained and rings true through our storytelling. And as far as it goes with my job, I don't know how I would use AI to do what I do. I have to see what is being communicated, interpret what is being communicated, and then apply a specific look to a different language. I don't even know how that would work with AI. And, the only thing that I can really say that I've used AI for is to help me translate a meaning of a phrase so I can know like where a break is in Japanese, for example. Like, how do I break this line to put it into 2 lines instead of 1 so that it makes sense?
I think the context is important. One of the things that we've been doing with it too is in terms of pairing, in terms of selection. There's hundreds of thousands of typefaces. That number gets smaller when you get into some more complex language character sets. Yes. That like if you're designing in Mandarin or designing in Japanese or Korean, they're bigger character sets, and so there's not as many as there are in Latin scripts. But the idea of saying, okay, what's the context of this experience, and maybe how can we create a short list of designs that might fit what you're trying to do? That's a useful tool, because I know every designer I've ever talked to knows that scrolling through typefaces is an agonizing experience. In our studio here, our creative services team here that is adept at that has sat and drawn letters their whole life. They're special kind of crazy people to want to sit and do that. We use those for our partners and our customers, but to be able to provide a shorthand or something that gets you started on that creative selection process is something that, we've seen work. But yeah, I mean, if there's any company that, we want to and we trust to get it right in that storytelling, it would be Pixar. So we'll be curious to kind of follow along how that evolves. When we were going back and forth on setting up this interview, it's funny. I have to out you a bit. John was sending us updates about a typeface that he was working on for a project, sort of out of the blue. Like, I'm trying to figure this out. Oh, now I figured it out. Oh, now it's actually going to work in the system that we're designing. And it was kind of fun because, again, in our world, to see people really light up around typography is fun for us. So I'd love to hear a bit more about that process for you and kind of what that project was all about.
Yeah, sure. So I was mentioned this new character, Mr. Smarty Pants. And in the domestic version of the film, he uses a particular font that is made up of little squares. I think I can say the name of the font. It's Bubble Dot. And when you stroke the font, it looks solid. And I've used this font this way before in other shows. And I'm pretty darn sure I'm going to be using it again in the future. And I've had to, with different translations that, some languages, the translations go pretty long and I've got to fit it in a particular space. And so I've had to condense this thing by hand many times before, and I'm probably going to do it again. I'm like, how many times am I going to do this by hand? Why don't I just make a condensed version of this thing as a font and be done with it? And then I'll save myself a bunch of time and headache. So I decided to do that. So as I've gotten my obligations done for the day, after hours, I started building this font. And instead of just doing the squares with the stroke on it, I built it, just solid without the stroke and in the condensed form. And it took me about a little over a week and then a few extra days for kerning and that sort of thing. And then you got another couple of days for, I forgot about this pair and I forgot about that pair. Then finally I just had to say, it's done. Maybe I forgot a couple of other pairings, but I have to be finished and move on. So the international version of Mr. Smarty Pants will use my condensed version of Bubble Dot, but it's not called Bubble Dot. It's I called it Digital Fakery. Because if you look too closely at it, it's not a pure bitmap. It cheats a little bit.
I mean, I love, you talked earlier about kind of falling into graphic design, not knowing it was really a career, and then falling into designing typography. And I have to tell you, that's really how a lot of the typeface designers that I work with and know have fallen into it. They became graphic designers and then had a project where they had to do something with type and realized they love type. Very few people get taught you can be a typeface designer as a career.
Right.
And so a lot of these folks that I have the privilege of working with and alongside, they found their way into it by doing what you just described too. And it brings me back to, I think a theme of this conversation is the idea of creative surfing, which I really like how you framed that up. And I read, as a comedian, I admire a lot of these legends, but I read Steve Martin's autobiography, or one of the short books that he wrote about his life. And one of the pieces of advice that he got that really resonated with me was the idea that you will use everything you've ever learned. And what he meant by that is you never know where your life or your career is going to take you, but you'll be very surprised at how something you learned 20 years ago in some totally unrelated field comes back and is prescient in the work that you're doing now. And 100%. I couldn't resonate more with me because I have examples of that, ad nauseum. But from your perspective, having been in music, having been in entertainment with Big Idea and, all of the kind of experience you've had, what are a couple of those things, those tools or things that you learned that you are surprised still kind of come into your work today?
Oh my gosh. Branding. All the rules I learned about branding back at the design agency I used to work for, and how that comes up in the work that I do now inside of Pixar. And how strange is that? We have this character, Lilypad, who is a product, and she comes in a box that Bonnie opens, and the box has this branding all over it. So I'm literally designing international packaging with all this branding all over it. And I'm like, man, this is just like back in my Wenzel Hess days in Chicago.
That's amazing. It's an amazing example. I mean, you're when you're doing that, however many years ago, to think it would bring you closer. That's a great one. here in this world, having done comedy for so long and tried to make it in entertainment, and lived in New York and lived in LA and did that, some of the experiences that I've had closest to entertainment working with amazing storytellers have been through typography. It's not been through comedy. Getting to work with, with brands. We're out here. I'm out in LA right now for Canva Create. Canva is a great partner of ours, and they're deeply embedded in the entertainment world, as is, are a lot of the brands specifically. We work with a lot of entertainment brands. So, but I've always been shocked by that. Like all the things that I learned from pursuing creative work have come back to support my actual career, quote unquote. So that's a good example.
Even like coming up, like during the digital revolution, back in my Wenzel Hess days, before I got into entertainment, part of our agency was still doing things mechanically. We had a guy cutting rubylith on traditional mechanicals. And I remember all of that. And I had to do some work with some of that too. And some of that, like getting your fingers dirty stuff, that still resonates with me. We've got a letterpress printer here. If you have an opportunity to do stuff like that, I think you really ought to do it, because your computer is not a full medium of expression for your human experience as a creative person. You need to get your hands dirty, in my opinion.
I love that advice. I think it's an amazing way to end it. The only downside to that advice is that my wife is a brilliant designer herself. She bought a 125-year-old letterpress and put it in our dining room. So
nice.
That was against my will, because I was, what are you going to do with this? Why is this here? But the fact that you use that specific example, she's really going to get a kick out of that. But excellent. I love the idea of having something tactile and being out in the world and working on things that are real. It's a good way to stay connected to this shared humanity and reality that we need to protect so much.
Yeah, 100%.
Thank you, John, so much for joining us on Creative Characters. Really appreciate the insights that you shared. And for everybody listening, thanks for joining for another great episode. And we'll look forward to catching up with you all next time.
Thanks for having me, Billy.
To check out John's portfolio, go to poptopstudio.com. That's POPTOP studio.com. Or watch an international version of Soul, Onward, or Toy Story 5.
Thanks for listening. If you like our show, please subscribe, rate us, and share us with a friend. Creative Characters is brought to you by Monotype. It's produced by Christopher Olin and Mia Sullivan. We'll be back in a couple weeks. Take care.